There we go.
Nice.
But there's no video. What is happening? There it is.
There it is.
Let's... There we go. Stop streaming?
Nice.
Yeah. Alright. But there's no video.
Have we gone up yet?
Yeah, we're up right now.
Okay. I need to step away for just a moment, unfortunately. Just give me 1 second. Gotta run medicine to the little one. The sick one. Get it.
So let's do that. And let's do this. And then we'll do this. No, how do I put the playlist back up?
I still see it on mine.
How do I make it the big?
I think you just click on it. Or hit the watch together thing. Is it floating around?
Yeah.
In the top left of it, there's like watch together.
Got it.
Yep. Oh.
So, I don't know about you, but for like most of my life, I struggled with like what is real, I guess is what I would say.
Right.
And then, I don't know, I struggled with a lot of shit, to be honest with you. But I think that was like one of the most fundamental things that I dealt with in my life. And more so, it was like you get to this point where you start to question like what is knowledge. And philosophy has a very interesting statement it makes, and it says that knowledge is defined as a justified true belief. So like, do I know where my car is? Well, yeah, it's outside the fucking hotel, it's right there. But if somebody had stolen it, did I really know, do I know where it is? Like, while I'm sitting here, but I didn't,
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So then you get down
You
this,
think you knew.
yeah, so you get down this weird rabbit hole of like deontology. This is like back and forth about like what knowledge is. So then I went to like what is real? Like what does that even fucking mean? What does it? It's some philosophers call it like partaking of being, but I feel like that's just a fancy way of saying like what the fuck is real?
Right.
And Descartes has like some interesting philosophies on this, where he talks about how a demon could potentially be in charge of your eyes, and everything that we see is actually like being projected to us by this demon. And then Plato has a very similar analogy where with the allegory of the cave, where we're all looking this way, but reality is actually behind us.
Right.
And that shit always fucks with me, right? Like at the end of the day, when nobody's around, that shit always fucks with me.
Yeah, that's where the mind seems to want to travel to, is that question. Grabbing onto what am I, what is real, how do I know it's real, how can I prove it to me if it's real?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the only thing you can prove is you, right? That's
And even at that, dude, I'm not convinced of that anymore.
damn.
Yeah,
Nah,
because it's like, well, maybe we'll get into that, but continue.
no, I think we have to attack that now since you've opened that door.
No, so it's what you didn't choose any of your likes. You didn't choose any of your wants or aspirations. These things just kind of happened to you. Like, there's no reason why I love the foods that I love. I didn't choose it. I just like them. It's like my taste in music. It just happened. I just liked this stuff more than I liked others. And I'm putting the nomenclature of I on it because I don't know what else to say. But can you really define it as you?
Okay.
So often in philosophy, you hear that you is the delegation. It's assignment. It's saying that, like, I believe this is me. But the further you unwrap that onion, the fewer things belong to you. More things just kind of happened to you.
Yes, for sure. But even if you finish Descartes' meditations, right? He's famously quoted with "I think, therefore I am."
Right.
And that's not really the translation. It's I think. It's because I think I am. Right? Because I think. Because I can question any of this. That's how I know I'm real. Like, you can't. It's the awareness part of it. So yeah. So you're not questioning whether or not you're real. You're questioning what is you.
Yeah, what is the fabric that is?
Oh, okay. Yeah, see,
inside
that's
you?
a whole different fucking
Yeah.
statement, bro.
Kind of. It bleeds, man. Like, so that continues to bleed because I don't know. The further I dive that hole, man, the more I'm like, okay, like we've made jokes in the past about, like, you think that everyone around you is a rendition, right? Like
Yeah.
some sort of fabrication or an NPC made for you. It's like, what happens when you're not the main character in that story, bro? Like, you're someone else's rendition, and it's like everything that you're doing is for them.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, all your,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah, I do.
Yeah.
So, along this journey of figuring out of like what is real, I came across something that I find super fucking interesting that I feel like you would too. And I don't really want to preface it with anything. I really just want to. I need to figure out how to get this full screen though.
I don't see a
There we go.
option.
Boom.
You got it?
So here we go. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
In this episode, while bringing people from Rad's hippocampus, John Hopkins and Jonathan Dostrovsky reckoned that there were many special neurons whose activity was strongly correlated with the animal's position in space. Let's do a virtual experiment. We will trace the animal's brain as it runs freely around the key, and at the same time, stick an electrode in one of the hippocampal neurons, recording its activity. Anytime it activates, or in other words, generates a spike, which is a fundamental unit of communication between animals. We're going to place a dot on the point in space where the red was located. You can see what happens. This neuron seems to be a huge fan of this particular point on the ground. You can clearly see the neuron's preferred location. Due to such spatial specificity, neurons that exhibit this radical activity were given the term place cells. Those where the place cell is active is called place field. Note the distinction. A place cell is the neuron itself, a nerve cell seated inside the hippocampus, while its place field is the neuron of the external world. You can't say that the place field of this neuron is the circle 1 meter diameter in the center of it. You might ask a reasonable question. But after all, we are three-dimensional creatures. We don't move to see the plane. fish, birds, and bats. As we know from a few brilliant experiments, place cells are sensible to the third dimension as well. For example, if you wirelessly recorded the hippocampal activity of a freely flying bat, yes, people do that too, you'd see that place fields roughly form spheres in three-dimensional space. And in rats, which moved in a cubic maze that required climbing up and down, place cell activity represented the entire volume. So even the surface-dwelling animals have the circuitry for 3D navigation, which, if you think about it, is not surprising. But what is the role of place cells? Do these neurons really govern the behavior? Are they the working horses of spatial navigation that play an active role in construction of these internal representations of space? Or do they merely correlate with that type of behavior? Let's see how it can be uncovered. The experimental setup is really elegant. Researchers trained the mice to run on a linear track in virtual reality. The mouse was head-fixed and running on a spherical treadmill in front of the surrounding screen.
Bro, look at that. Like, there's videos of this rat, and it's connected to the computer by that little fucking cable, and it's on a ball. So it thinks it's walking,
Right.
and it's surrounded by a fucking computer screen.
Right.
It's literally the Truman Show, bro. And then what they found is that these play cells still fucking fire. Everything
Of course they do.
still operates the
course they
same,
do.
bro.
As it
Everything.
spins the treadmill, the computer-generated picture on the screen updates accordingly. So the animal has a full illusion of actually Interesting. Even though it might seem to us, external observers, as just an illusion, there is absolutely no difference from the point of the mouse brain. It receives the matching signals from the eyes, muscles, vestibular apparatus, integrates them together, and concludes, hey, I'm moving through space. Consequently, the circuitry employed during navigation in real and virtual spaces should be the same. But what happens to place cells in this case? I mean, technically, the animal is physically fixed in one place, right? Yet, if it can successfully navigate through a virtual maze, there should be some spatially related hippocampal activity that makes it possible by carrying out underlying computations. Indeed, it was observed many times experimentally that place fields do exist in virtual reality, and they tile up the corresponding virtual space. Now, in our setup, as the animal traverses this virtual linear track, we could, by recording hippocampal activity, detect the place cells and their place fields. Then, looking at where the place fields are with respect to the track, we classify neurons according to their preferred location. For example, that this group of cells is active when the mouse is at the beginning of the track. This group activates roughly in the middle, and these neurons fire selectively at the end of the path. In this particular experiment, mice were trained to run to the end of the track and then start licking to get the reward. The question is, what will happen if we stimulate certain place cells, artificially force them to spike when they're not supposed to? That is, when the animal is far away from their place
That's a
field.
damn good
If we
question.
think it's true that the activity of place cells
Wait for the
is
answer,
drives
bro.
spatial behavior, then by applying early stimulation to the neurons that normally fire at the end of the track, we would fool the brain into thinking that it's already there and it's time to start clicking. And this is exactly the type of behavior we observe experimentally. Of course, activating specific place cells
Fuck.
drives their spatially associated.
So, just so we are all on the same page, what that's saying is that you have cells in your brain that activate relative to the terrain around you,
Stimuli.
right? So they only fire in certain parts. And there's other places in this video, and it's relative to like geometry and rooms usually. And what he just said was that you can artificially activate these things, and all that means is just applying an electric current to the fucking neuron, getting it to do its thing, and it will think it's somewhere else. That shit boggles my mind. Number one, that we can do that, and number two, that's even what
Yeah.
that's doing.
Yeah, if we talk about the physical science of that, that's insane. But the implications of that go deep, dude.
The behavior. But what would happen if, on the other hand, we stimulate those place cells that normally fire at the start of the track, somewhere closer to the end? That way, the mouse is quote-unquote convinced that it is located closer to the start than it actually is, and sometimes runs further beyond the boundary of virtual environment, a real-life equivalent of which would be crushing through the wall. And this totally blew my mind when I first heard it. This provides direct evidence of the causal role of hippocampal place cell neurons in constructing the cognitive maps. Now, the question that arises, how does this association between nerve cells in the hippocampus and their preferred patches on the ground take place? It turns out that the layout of place cells is not constant. If you look at the activity of a given neuron, it would have one place field in this environment, different place field in a different environment, and maybe show no activity at all in the third. Such changes in firing activity constitute a remapping of place cell representation of space. It can take a variety of different forms, and the degree of remapping depends on the similarity between two environments. For example, if you repaint the walls and move furniture around, the majority of place fields would change. However, if you had just a little picture on the wall, only a small fraction of place fields would shift, with the rest remaining mostly intact. Unfortunately, we are still lacking any meaningful way to describe what goes where and according to which rules when remapping takes place. Sometimes, though, the transformation of place fields clearly relates to the transformation of the environment. For example, in the case when a mouse was in a cylindrical chamber with a cue card at a certain position, rotating the card caused the place fields to rotate accordingly, but maintain their relative locations. Even more interesting example was observed by
So that last one, right? So at the beginning of this, I didn't really define this point, but Descartes and Kant, Berkeley, Hume, most of these philosophers, there's one problem in philosophy, and that is we don't have direct access to reality. Once Descartes said what he said, everything could be a hallucination. Everything can be a hallucination. There could be no objective reality. This whole thing comes really full circle for us in the technological era when people start talking about what is that one thing? The simulation theory. But I don't think that they fully understand what that actually means. You know what I'm saying? So what that last little part there with the circle, what that shows is there's a difference between egocentric mapping, right, relative to me, and like world mapping. So it's not reading something off of the earth. Does that make sense? It's like a local space. And you do a lot of stuff in with the graphic design and Unreal Engine and game development, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's like there is something called local space.
Yeah, there's local and world.
In world space.
Yeah, in Unreal, that's how the nomenclatures exist anyway. And it works by like, if you were to affect the rotation of an object in local space, it's different than affecting it on that larger scale. It's the equivalent of spinning a plate on a table versus spinning the entire house.
Yeah. And that's the part of this that's most interesting to me, is that I am projecting these things onto reality, or reality. So Kant basically says something along the lines of there's representations, and our brain is getting these representations and then creating something itself. And that's more of what this is going to show.
Keith himself, when place fields stretched along with the box, when he varied the aspect ratio of the walls, hippocampal remapping still remains largely a mysterious phenomenon. But we can at least hypothesize what useful role it might play. What remapping tells us is that different environments have different internal maps. And so the pattern of place cell activity provides information not only about animals' position within the environment, but also about the identity of the environment itself. So, what aspects of the environment should be altered for remapping to occur? What is enough for the hippocampus to classify two surroundings as different? Interestingly, even the change in non-spatial features can cause a portion of place cells to remap. For example, changing the order in the room, or fear conditioning. If you apply mild electric shock while the mouse is running around in a familiar cage, so that it develops the fear of this environment, that causes place cells to remap.
Oh,
even though
fuck.
So this literally goes to show that perception is everything. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the implications of this are wild. Like, this is why. Oh, fuck, man. Like, this is diving deep into, like, not only PTSD.
Yep.
And, like, the assignments of things there, but also, like, part of me seeing this correlation to, like, autistic functions, dude. And the, like, on a severity of autism, there's a difficulty of abstraction, right? And I've talked to you about that a table, like, you can have a picture of a table with all the chairs pushed in around it, and then a table of that same, or a picture, excuse me, of that table and chairs, and another picture with all the chairs pulled out. And for someone on a higher or a more extreme side of the spectrum can't abstract those. Those are two different rooms.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same room. So it's like that mapping error. And that's fucking insane, dude.
So he talks about. Well, I've read the book that all of this kind of comes from.
Yeah.
I've made it halfway through, and he talks about something about like the orienting principle, and we've all felt this before. like when you're like, whoa, hold up, I have to like reevaluate where I'm standing in the world, because I could have sworn that thing was way the fuck over there, and this was actually right there, and your whole like the whole world shifts inside of your own head, and that's what he's talking about, the orienting principle. So with this right here, to me, and I'm not a huge computer nerd, but to me, what these place cells begin to look like is random access memory.
Yeah.
Right? And then later on, we come across like the theta wave and the function of theta and how our memories are actually encoded because of our hippocampus. But that would make sense that the RAM is what's creating these maps and then putting them in somewhere, and then we operate off of the old shits. Right?
Right.
And then this fear remapping changes, it explains everything about how PTSD has affected my life and how I watch it affect my friends on a daily fucking basis. And it's like, holy fuck, like how did you get that that's what that meant? Like because she said it was nice, she fucking hated it, you know what I'm saying? Or because that dude is standing there with his hands in his pockets, he's got a gun and he's gonna fucking kill me and this, that, and the other, you know what I mean?
Right. Fuck,
About the
dude.
chamber itself
It's tough.
changed. So the internal map of a familiar restaurant you have been going in for years is drastically altered once you have a heart-shattering breakup at one of the tables. We can see how there is this additional layer of information about the context, not just the physical space. And remapping ties this information about physical location in space together with particular events and contexts meaningfully relating to that space. And it raises the question whether place cell is a great term after all. Now we are getting to the limits of this terminology. Yes, initially it was discovered that certain pyramidal neurons in the hippocampus show location specificity, and we still refer to them as place cells in studies on spatial navigation. But as it turns out, they can directly represent non-spatial information as well. Let's consider the following landmark experiment. Rats were trained in a sound manipulation task.
Oh, this is
They were
so
first
fucked.
presented with the sound of a particular frequency. And to get the reward, the rat had to move the joystick, which varied the frequency of a tone.
Good for the
produced by the
rats.
speaker. Basically, they had to make the frequency match the frequency of a sound they heard at the start. As you might have guessed by now, the investigators recorded the activity of pyramidal neurons in the hippocampus, the same type of cell that usually has a specificity to physical location. And here's the kicker. As the animal was varying the frequency, neurons seemed to have a preferred
Of course
rhythm,
they did.
around reaching high firing rates, and showed almost no activity when the sound produced was in a drastically different range of frequencies. They behaved in exactly the same fashion as conventional place cells behave during foraging, having a well-defined place fields. It's as if the rat was mentally navigating in this acoustic space of sounds to find the desired frequency. In that analogy, the activity of a neuron is that of a typical place cell. It's just this space is more abstract. It's not physical location. What it tells us is that place cells can play a more general role. It looks like hippocampus constructs and tracks continuous variables which are relevant to the task. In the case of spatial navigation, such task-related variables would be X and Y position. In the joystick experiment, the most important variable for the brain was sound frequency, and the hippocampus kind of switched modes to keep track of that. Of course, we are still far away from any clear, unifying interpretation of what hippocampus does and how it does it. I've already given away the hint that since place cells can encode non-spatial, contextual aspects, they could play a key role in construction of episodic memories. And that is indeed the case, which we will talk about in later videos.
Bitch.
It is the holy grail.
So, I'll get to the point, but what do you think so far? Where's your head at?
The implications of this are really deep. Again, I just want to comment on good on science for being able to measure this shit in the first place. B, good on rats for being able to figure out shit. But most importantly, man, so the hippocampus's main function is what?
Memory.
Memory. And it's, like we're saying, that random augmented or assigned or accessed, or at least that's the implication of this. Where does that, so I guess what in the last thing he said with it being assigned to episodic things is like, this is the correlation between these memories and nostalgia, coming back to a place you haven't been in a long time that had either a positive or a negative. We'll go with a positive effect for now. where the fuck is that stored? And how often,
Well-
how many things can be augmented to these same neuro or synapse areas of your brain?
So, do you remember that one dude? I can't remember what the fuck his name is, but he wrote that book, Behave, right? And he talks
Yeah.
about there's a context that's applied to all of this stuff, and the original context of everything is survival. It's whether
Right.
or not I'm gonna fucking die. That is the baseline of all of this, and
Sure.
all of the contextual information after that is built off of that. So, like, for instance, if I found food in this certain place, or if this is where I can find a mate, or this is da 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 da. But then we're starting to talk about the more prefrontal cortex and how those two things communicate together, because there's more to all of this, but that's where that contextual stuff comes from. Does that make
Okay.
sense? And then,
Yeah, so it's you're assigning a category
yeah, but
on impact.
the hardest part for me to understand, because I'm not fucking super good at math and I'm not super good with computers, is that understanding that all of these things are happening in tandem. Like, you always say this statement where, like, everybody thinks of life as like a book. I open it and then and then I close it. So all of this shit in the brain, it's not just like this is where it starts. Like,
It's
all
all
of these
quantum.
things are happening at the same fucking time. And when you think about and I have kids, so I've like super dived into like Piaget and the other dude Erickson, and there's a third one, I can't remember his name, but their model, the developmental model. And when you hear the term object permanence, bro, when you watch a baby be able to have object permanence, it blew my fucking mind.
It has to.
When my daughter had no idea about anything, she knew things were moving and it was entertaining, and you could make her giggle and shit, and you could like hide and then come back and she's like, oh, there he is. You know what I mean?
Right.
But then
right.
playing with her and then saying something about like her baby or her doll or her fucking block that she likes, and she just gets up and goes over to somewhere she can't see and grabs it and comes back. It's like, motherfucker, you couldn't do that 12 hours ago.
Right.
12
Yeah,
fucking
this is
hours
new.
ago.
This is new.
So,
Fuck, man.
and then if you extend that, like, so I kind of want to bring this always back to Kant, because what Kant says is that we have two innate ideas, and it's not so much that in the way I just worded that is misleading. It's more of like the way in which your brain operates is these two things. We have innate ideas of time and we have innate ideas of space. So like the metric in which we are looking at everything, it can't just be localized space. The shit can't just render because I'm here or because there's a conscious being. That like at the end of the end of the day, that wouldn't make sense. There has to be somewhere for the thing to be in.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? There would have to be something for it to be in, and that's
Yeah, it has
absolute
to consume space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then time is just so like when the baby is like only able to see two-dimensionally, extension is what they call it in philosophy, occurs because of time. Like extension into the third dimension is because of time, because you've been exposed to this that just created space.
If you can just kind of hammer that a little bit, are you meaning that it's taken up into this time, like it has taken in amount of time to get the three-dimensional idea, or is it that you're seeing the time it would take to consume the space in front of you, such as like if I'm
a little bit of
like
both.
reaching out?
I think it's a little bit
Right?
of both, because I do understand what you're saying with n amount of time, but for my understanding, or from just looking at my fucking kids, man, and just growing up as an adult, the things that I understand as a 30-year-old versus the things that I understood as a 15-year-old,
It took 30 years.
I can only attribute to the exposure to time.
Sure.
So that's literally just more space to hold.
Correct. Yeah.
And then, dude, there's so much more about this specifically, but I want to keep I want to keep.
Yeah, we
pressing.
can keep hammering nails. But something that you did say earlier that we kind of breezed over is you're right. These things are happening all at once, which in a computer term is called quantum. The absolute non-binary system. That something can be 0 and 1 at the same time, or any decimal or fraction of that. It can be 2 parts 1, 1 part 0, 100 parts 0, 2 parts 1, whatever. And it's almost impossible for me to comprehend. I know that for sure. I can't deal with like quantum computing. And I try to watch videos on it and learn, and I'm like, dude, I don't. The switch is either on or off, bro. Like I can't imagine this space where it doesn't have to be a switch. Like, so we can.
I struggle with
The brain
that
has a
too.
dedicated system to keep track of
really
the head
hard.
orientation, which consists of special head direction cells. They seem to be representing the angle where relative to the environment you are facing, and play a vital role in spatial navigation. These neurons have a preferred direction, and signal you whether you face in this direction or not by increasing the firing rate. Head direction system is a well-studied subject.
Oh,
It provides
fuck.
a very promising ground to apply the methods of analyzing the collective dynamics of a large number of neurons to uncover the true nature of latent variables being encoded. Remember our assumptions. The information representation unfolds at the scale of the population of neurons. So only by examining the activity of a large number of cells simultaneously, we can uncover something useful. If the collective dynamics of the circuit encodes a variable of a certain dimension and certain topology, then the activity of this network would be localized to a subspace or a manifold of the
Dude,
massive
saying a lot of
dimension
shit, and then
topology.
you'll see the
And so
picture,
we
and it
record
makes
activity
perfect
of
sense.
part of the thalamus where head direction cells are located. As time goes on, we make measurements about firing of neurons, obtaining a cloud of points in high-dimensional space. Then we reconstruct the shape of this point cloud, how exactly they align in space, under the hypothesis that the neurons we are studying represent the head direction. What would you expect the resulting manifold to look like? Well, if the circuit truly encodes only the direction the animal's facing, we would first of all expect the manifold to be one-dimensional, because it's one variable. We'd also expect to see a hole in the middle, because the variable is measuring the angle. So basically, something like a loop which is homeomorphic to a circle. And this is exactly what we find. The activity of a real group of neurons inside a real mouse just running around is localized to a one-dimensional ring, though granted quite a convoluted one. And the state of the network described by the point on this ring at every instance of time directly corresponds to the animal's head direction. That is, just by looking at the experimental data we record from the brain and not seeing the mouse at all, we can definitely say which direction it is facing. Isn't that fascinating? Interestingly, equal distances along the ring correspond to equal differences in the facing angle. So there is a beautiful one-to-one mapping between the two. To me, this
fuck,
is
it's
just a brilliant example of
perfect.
how intrinsic dimension and topology of the neural activity manifold inform us about the structure of data being encoded inside the circuit. Topological data analysis and computational neuroscience are both very young fields, and they are only beginning to intertwine with each other. But this interaction is very, very promising on our quest to understand how information is embedded into high-dimensional representations, allowing the brain to perform complex tasks. By analyzing the geometry of neural population activity, we can gain insights into the internal workings of various brain regions.
So, this part here. So do you see I was like making a flower, right?
Yeah.
The hard part for me to understand at first was like, why? What? I get the visual representation, but like, what the fuck are you actually showing me? So the further it goes out, is the higher the rate of fire.
Okay.
So it like loops out and it's firing harder, and then it's coming back in, it's firing less. That's what
Okay.
those loops are. So like, and then that's what this voltage traces are to down here. So there's those spikes, but then they map it to a polar plot system basically, which is super fucking interesting. But so literally, your head direction cells are a loop inside of you. Have a compass inside of your brain. Now,
Yeah.
whether it doesn't associate to north per se, but
Well, I was gonna say, dude, like, I know that I have a pretty good natural sense of direction. I think you do too. Is it because those cells are used more often? They're strengthened. Because there's some people that you can take and like plop in anywhere, bro, and they're lost already.
yeah, my wife
They don't
asked
know
me
where they
that same
park at
question.
Walmart.
My wife asked me that same question, and the answer
Yeah.
I gave her was because we're not going to get to this video in this stint, but there's a point where it starts to talk about how place cells are actually used to map social interactions too, like relationships between people. So, so some people are going to be more better at the abstract, and I would say that we're just dumb. Do you see what I'm saying? Like I have to have a physical object in front. I have to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I feel like there's some people who are better at the abstract than we are. Now, again,
I agree.
There's probably a reason that we're better at certain things, because I know for me personally, I've been through a lot of trauma in my life, so the only goal I have in life is to survive, right? It's I'm afraid to die, basically. Where when I'm entering, clearing a building, my spatial relationship between my friends and the enemies is more important to me than whether or not Steve and Jill are still dating.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%.
So the problem with that, though, comes when we come home and we still think that that's the only thing that's important.
Yes.
And that's the hard part, because then it's like your kids get secondary trauma from something that didn't even happen to them. You know what I mean? Like, they're now all of a sudden they have anxiety from entering a room, and they don't even know why. At least I know why. When I walk through a door and I'm walking sideways, I know why I'm doing it. You know what I mean? Like, I know why I can't really. It's something that I actively try to fight. But when you're doing it, when you do that same shit to your kids, they have no idea why.
No.
So this is where shit gets fucking.
We know from this
weird
study from the lab of Edvard and Maybrit Moser that head direction cells synapse directly on place cells in the hippocampus.
So I just want to say, don't follow like the physiology so much. Just try to understand the concepts. Because some of these words that they're going to say, I don't know. You know what I mean?
So our question is as follows. If place cells are sensitive to the direction of a maze compartment, are they getting this directional information from head direction cells? Our way of answering this question is as follows. If we get rid of the head direction cells, what would happen to the place cells in our maze with compartments facing different directions? What we predict is that the place cells would no longer be sensitive to direction and would thus fire in the same way in each of the 4 compartments.
They become independent.
So this is what we did. We wanted to get rid of the head direction cell input to the place cells to see if the place cells would no longer be able to tell compartments facing different directions apart. Now, the anatomy is slightly complicated here. Though the proximal connection between the head direction cells and the place cells occurs in the medial entorhinal cortex projections to the hippocampus,
this is the part that I was saying.
Entorhinal cortex being MEC. The source.
What he's saying right now is that basically this thing is where the head direction cell information. This is where they've tracked it to. They're going to like zap it, basically delete it, lesion it, so that it no longer works. And so that this information no longer makes it to the hippocampus. That's it. They're just cutting they're cutting the connection, and they're trying to see what happens.
The source of the head direction cell signal is further upstream, at least according to the evidence from the laboratories of Pat Sharp and Jeff Taube. Thus, to remove the entire circuit, or at least the majority of the circuit as we know it today, we can get rid of the lateral mammillary nucleus. Doing so should block the head direction cell information from getting to the hippocampus.
This is fucking
this
wild.
Is preliminary data from control animals, that is rats who still have their head direction cell system intact. What we find in these animals is that place cells show repeated fields in compartments that face the same direction, but only show a single field when the compartments face different directions. This again suggests that place cells are sensitive to direction. These recordings, I should say, were done by Dr. Bruce Harlan and Dr. Roddy Greaves. So what happens in animals without a head direction cell system? As in the control animals, rats with a removal of the lateral mammillary nuclei, the potential source of head direction cell signals, show repeated fields when the compartments face the same direction. In this way, they are similar to the place cells we saw in our control animals. What we observed in the same compartments facing different directions, however, was striking. Here, place cells tended to fire in most or all of the compartments. So to summarize, as we had seen before, in normal rats or control animals,
So this image looks, because it's not an exact science. They're literally fucking lesioning microscopic
Sure.
shit.
Yeah.
But what this is saying is that most of the information of place cells, or at least a large chunk of it, comes from your head direction.
Right, but fuck, man. So maybe I'm missing the target of these. But what it looked like to me is that with the lack of head direction or orientation, you will attempt to assign meaning to everything, so that you're not lost. Is that you're creating independence in every single portion of it. You're doing variable mitigation to the nth degree. You're memorizing instead of assigning. Gross. I don't know if I'm picking up the right thing.
Explain that a little bit more, because I feel like...
Okay, so when you... In the beginning of this video, when it's showing the head orientation to the rooms that are facing in different directions, there's very few hotspots, right? Very few generated ideas. And it's almost like that thing was able to say, as long as I have this coordinate mapped, I know where everything else is in relation to that coordinate. But if I'm not able to orient myself to this coordinate, I must memorize the entire landscape. So I have to commit all of this ground to memory to know where I am in it. Because I'm always... I can't base anything off of the orientation of object A. It's being in a fucking... like a... oh, shit, I can't remember what they're called now. The immersion tanks, dude. Help me out. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Sensory deprivation.
Sensory deprivation. It's like being in one of those, dude. Like, you had to assign meaning to everything around you in that moment, or at least that's the analogy I can think of right now.
No,
I don't know if I'm onto it.
No, I kind of see what you're saying. This is a little bit more abstract than I was about to go, but I do agree with you that there is something happening here without the head direction cells where this, especially in the circular one, where it thinks each one of these rooms is the same.
Yeah.
And it's going to map them the same. Because
I can't tell, obviously. Like, see, I didn't take it as it was mapping them the same. I took it as it's mapping them the same in pattern, like trying to reveal the majority of the room so that it knows where it is. That this is this fucking room because it has these portions, and this is this one. Like, it has to put everything in a box.
Well,
because it can't orient.
Well, when it was orienting before, it's only orienting in certain aspects of the room, but then once you change the world space of the rooms, the place cells only fire in certain ones because they're only activated by that head direction. Because once you change the orientation of these rooms, you're changing the orientation of the head. So then when it does without the head direction, every room is the same. It can't tell the difference.
It's not moving on my screen, but I'd like to re-see these things.
Oh, I'm doing it on mine.
Okay. Yeah. There we go. I did it on mine.
So it's like
okay, so I'm looking at the ones that were...
232.
232. 232.
So this is the original place cells with active head direction cells. So when they're linear, the place cells are firing in the same spot, right? Because it's just reconstructing the same room.
Pretty much all down the hallway is what you're saying, yeah?
Yes. And then once they change the world space, like the rooms are rotated, the head direction cell is informing this one place cell of this area because it's actually mapping all of these rooms at the same time. But there's other place cells that are mapping these. So when this happens, it's, in my understanding, it basically thinks that this is the same fucking room. It has no way to do anything other than make this the same room.
Interesting. And see, I'm taking it as I know that, so if we take the bottom right example, I know that room 1 is room 1 because I have it labeled. And if I orient myself, I don't need to assign these to memory because I already know this room above it is room 2 and the one laterally to it is room 4. I already know that because this is my radar tower. This is my dish.
I see.
And then you take away that orientation and that thing decides to frag every fucking room with full memories, dude.
Yeah. It's yeah.
And that's at like 320, and it's the top example.
Yeah.
That's what I'm picking up from it, dude. Like it feels right to me that if I can't have, like, it's like being too drunk, and you have to put your foot on the ground to stop the spins.
Yeah.
But without any sort of grounding orientation, dude, you're just fucking getting sent. Like, and you have to be able to map everything around you.
It's almost, the way you're describing it is almost as if when you're walking into every social interaction, you're mapping, you're almost changing the way you're talking to every single person.
Correct.
You don't have a singular way of mode of being. It's every situation is new. Every situation you have to like apply as much pressure to as possible.
Correct. Everything is just as important as the last.
Yeah. Expending a lot of energy
Was
doing
striking.
Yeah.
Here, place cells tended to fire in most or all of the... So to summarize, as we had seen before, in normal rats or control animals, we see that place cells show repeated fields when we have compartments that are facing the same direction. And they show less repetition when the same compartments are arranged in different directions. However, when we removed the head-directed cell system by removing or lesioning the lateral mammillary nuclei, we saw that the place cells also showed repetition when the compartments or the rooms faced different directions. So what that suggests to us is that head direction cells may work closely with place cells and allow them to be able to distinguish environments which look similar but which face different directions.
I would even take it a step further, that it's distinguish similar environments, and then you have to add the social constructs to that too.
Right. Fuck, man.
We all know that sleep is
What you got?
This is just really cool. I like that last video a lot because, again, like and I don't know if I'm overanalyzing or overreading, but it feels like the implications from each of these videos gets like more and more expansive. And I don't know, dude, this is sick. These are super cool.
Here we talk about the brain, both the theory of how it works and as well as practice of how to study and learn more about it. If you're interested, consider subscribing to the channel not to miss it.
This dude's like Russian or some shit, like a Russian neuroscientist student.
He's kicking ass.
The executive center of the brain.
Oh, this is the cortex,
It's a place for your memories, thoughts,
obviously.
and language. You can think of the cortex as a warehouse, a huge library. And the second key component is the hippocampus, a loopy structure that lies in the depths of the brain and has extensive connections to the cortex. Now, hippocampus plays a role of a librarian. It puts newly arriving groups at according shelves and restructures the existing library. And this back and forth communication between the hippocampus and the cortex is of special interest, accounting for the bulk of memory consolidation. It's important to understand that even though our bodies lie still during sleep, the brain does not shut down. Instead, its neurons constantly fire up with its own internally generated activity. Unlike the body, the brain doesn't rest. It just shifts gears and enters a new mode of operation. This is called offline brain state. To better understand what happens inside the brain during such periods, let's first look at the usual online state of the brain during the day. Let's consider a lab mouse. At daytime, as it's running around and exploring the environment, signals flow from the cortex to the hippocampus. It receives sensory information and performs computations required for efficient spatial navigation.
So when it's saying it's receiving sensory information, the biggest thing that we have to take away from this is it's not all fucking visual. The sensory, the biggest fucking sensory information that is informing the place cells is, I think it's called proprioceptive, and it's like literally the movement of yourself, like my ability to walk. That's the biggest one, because there's other experiments where they take away all the visual cues, and this shit happens the same way, right? And then, yeah, that was it.
And the construction of cognitive maps. We have already discussed this aspect of hippocampus in the previous video of the series, so if you haven't seen this one, go check it out because we will build up from there. Hippocampal position-sensitive neurons, or place cells, fire in sequence, encoding the path the animal transverses. Now, let's turn off the lights and see what happens inside the brain of the sleeping neurons. The key idea is that at night, this dominant information flow from the cortex to the hippocampus
would be reversed. Now the hippocampus would step in and become the primary sender. But this messaging up to the cortex doesn't happen continuously. Instead, hippocampus sends information in discrete units, kind of like data packets. These events have a very peculiar and characteristic shape when they are detected on the underlying electrical activity of the brain. If you stick an electrode inside the mouse hippocampus while it's sleeping, the recorded signal would have certain bursts of activity, kind of like little hippocampal fireworks. The overall activity would suddenly go up and then decrease like a wave. And on top of this wave would be a very high frequency oscillation, kind of like a ripple on the water surface. This is why such events were called sharp wave ripples. And ever since these hippocampal explosions were discovered, they posed a question for researchers. At first, they were hypothesized to play a role in memory, because when the mouse was placed in a novel environment, the rate at which sharp wave ripples occur the following night increased compared to the familiar environment. But more convincing evidence came later, when it was discovered that artificially silence the sharp wave ripples, that is, interrupting this activity from happening, leads to a slower rate of learning and a decreased performance. And this is direct evidence that these hippocampal fireworks, whatever their nature is, are actually markers for the process of memory consolidation. But
So for me, right there, the fact that we can zap something and be like, "Nah, you can't learn that, bro." Like,
Yeah, you're done. You're done.
No, you do again. Go again.
But this validates so much of the like sleep consultation type shit, man, of being like, get good rest, go to bed on time, don't fucking do all this stupid shit.
Mm.
Interesting.
what exactly happens in the brain during these sharp wave ripples? Well, advances in technology allowed us to look at the spike.
I want to
of the
know.
ripple, and that is what exact neurons are firing and in what order. And this is perhaps the most exciting feature of the sharp wave ripple. Remember how during the day, place cells were firing in sequence, representing the trajectory. In fact, each spatial memory, such as the event of...
Do they fucking fire in the same order?
...can be thought of as a sequence of activating place cells, firing one after another in well-defined order, encoding the taken path. If you compare the activity of place cells during the daytime at times of active origin with their activity during sleep the following night, you will see something very interesting. Trajectories the mouse was taking during the day, at night recapitulated during the sharp wave ripple. And that means that the same place cells were activating one after another as if
God damn it.
only their order was reversed, and the timescale of the entire thing was much smaller.
Did you just hear that? The order was reversed.
Only their order was reversed, and the timescale of the entire thing was much smaller. It's as if the mouse brain was rewinding back the mental tape. This phenomenon was given the name hippocampal replay, or fast reverse replay to be exact. As we now believe, such reverse replay of a particular event is what plays the major role in consolidating the memory about order.
Bro, so that means our memories are fucking physical space. Again, they're happening. Like your brain as it's firing is... Oh, shit. I don't know if I like that feeling, dude. Fuck, man. That's incredible.
It gets worse. Or better.
Of course it does.
Or better, depending on how you want to look
The
at it.
fact that we can
Representing
measure
past
this.
trajectories is what helps to strengthen the synaptic connections between the nerve cells encoding this particular memory in the cortex. Now, it's important to understand that replay and the sharp wave replay is not exclusively a nighttime event. Yes, they are most
Here we go.
during the slow wave or deep sleep when there is a process of active consolidation going on. But they can also be observed at daytime, especially during periods of immobility. For example, as the mouse
When you're chilling.
successfully finds its way through a maze to a tasty reward, and
When you're
heavily
chilling,
sits
you're
down
all
to
fucked.
the hippocampus fires up a replay.
It's
of
alright.
that place cell sequence
It's drawing
to
correlations, dude.
and better find the route next time. But sometimes
What that just said was that it's replaying what you just did after you
it's
did
done.
it. Yep.
And then saying the yays or nays to it, dude.
Yep.
you would see really weird ripples whose content doesn't correspond to any of the past experiences.
So mice are super
Instead,
conscious,
place cell
dude.
firing
Ooh, here, this is.
But sometimes you would see really
Well, let's do this again.
The hippocampus fires up a replay of that path's place cell sequence to consolidate this memory and better find the route next time. But sometimes you would see really weird ripples whose content doesn't correspond to any
Actually,
of the
let's
past.
do
Is
that.
it remembering shit?
A replay
Hold on.
Of that path's play and heavily sits down to enjoy it. The hippocampus fires up a replay of that path's play cell sequence to consolidate this memory and better find the route next time.
So, after you've done it, your brain will then replay it. Your hippocampus will then replay it so that you can find the path better next time. So you were just asking about, like why is it that we can do it better in the military? Well, when you're doing land nav all the time, and when you're doing all this stuff all the time, you start to be able to this muscle just keeps working and
Right.
keeps working. And it's like that's how you end up at like the grocery store without even thinking about it because you've made the trip fucking 30,000
Yeah.
times.
But
With
sometimes
zombie driving.
you would see really weird ripples whose content doesn't correspond to any of the
This is
past
my favorite
sequences.
part.
Instead, play cell firing sequences encode the path the animal would take in the near future after the ripple was observed. And when that route was taken, you'd see that unlike reverse replay, play cells firing in this ripple were arranged in the correct order as they would be firing during the run, from start to finish. This led to the hypothesis that hippocampus uses this replay, or fast-forward replay, in decision-making for planning the future actions.
It's because they can't use the word projection because they already
Yeah.
use it in fucking when the cell
It
fires.
is now clear that the two types of replay, forward versus reverse, serve two different functions.
You are able to project into the future your consciousness to make plans. And this is scientific proof that we project.
Yeah, 100% it is.
That we
It's-
project. So when somebody is saying you're projecting right now, it's not a
You are.
fucking euphemism.
Yeah. No, you super are. You're actively projecting.
For example, changing reward only has
Fuck.
effect on reverse replays, but not the forward ones. Yet, the two types of replay are very similar phenomena. In fact, almost certainly they are two sides of the same coin. You can see how there is this beautiful process of mental time travel carried out by your own personal time machine, the hippocampus. It can go backwards in time, recapitulating past experiences in reverse order to reevaluate and consolidate, or it can fast forward into the near future to consider the different possibilities. To me, this mechanism is absolutely elegant.
That's wild.
Bizarre, dude.
This last one is the like the hard science of that exact same thing, but like, because the hard part for me is okay, you can say all that shit, but how the fuck did you prove it?
The cell's activity could be contingent on different contexts, but but if you're correlating activity with a context, you have to repeat that context many times in order to get the data to say this cell prefers this context to that context. Whereas what we're looking for is a flexible system that can say, right, I want to get there. How do I get there? So our claim here is that the sequences themselves can be responsive, and that's been a very difficult thing to establish. I think it's fair to say that replay has generally been thought of as a sort of spontaneous reverberation that might be spitting out all sorts of different sequences that you've experienced, but without any particular purpose, other than perhaps consolidating experiences you've had, but certainly not in terms of a directed navigational requirement. So we wanted to look at that specifically. We decided to look in a real spatial memory task, where we have a 2 meter by 2 meter arena with multiple possible goal locations, 36 possible goal locations. The idea was to get the animal to want to navigate to a specific location. And this way, this would give us the statistical power to be able to say if the sequences are approaching that one location as opposed to the others. The difficulty is, if the animal gets used to navigating to one particular location, he's not going to explore the whole environment. So we needed to come up with a task that would both allow for goal-directed navigation and exploration of the environment. So this is what we came up with. On odd trials, the animal has to forage around in this environment, and he doesn't know where the food will be. This chocolate, liquid chocolate, just pops up in one of these 36 little wells. Once he's found it, the very next trial, he's allowed to go back to the food. Then on the odd trial, the next trial, he has to forage around. Then he can go back to the food. So we're constantly toggling between random foraging trials and goal-directed trials. And the purpose of that is to get the animal to explore everywhere so we can get place fields everywhere. And we show here that the animal's much faster on the goal-directed trials than the random trials. So that establishes a number of things. That means he can't smell his way to the random trials. Otherwise, he'd be pretty fast at that too. And we know that he's motivated and able to remember where the food is because he's faster at getting there. The other problem we have to deal with is that we need a lot of cells. So you need something like between 10 and 20 cells arranged with fields along a linear track to be able to decode replay. So you're going to need something like 10 by 10 to 20 by 20, so between 100 and 400 cells to record in the open field. We actually don't have 400 cells, but we got pretty close. We did it by implanting 40 tetrodes simultaneously, bilaterally, so into both.
Look at that fucking hat, bro.
So this is an
That's
example of
fucking
the cells
insane,
we're able to record simultaneously. 212 cells, and these are their firing fields in this space. So you can see, firstly, let me draw your attention to these cells that fire everywhere. They're actually the interneurons, and they can be identified independently on the basis of the waveform and excluded. And the remainder of the cells have firing fields.
Look at all this data.
I don't even know how to read it, to be
You know
honest
what I'm
with you.
saying?
Like, this just looks like hell.
This is individual neurons.
Right.
And they're measuring whether or not it's a place cell. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, how the fuck are you finding these things? You know, you're just like, well, and then you go for, 10 minutes, you're like, well, that wasn't a place cell. How the fuck do you even figure that out? You know what I'm saying? So in the books and stuff, they explain how they go through this whole process, but this shit is nutty.
This is incredible.
These are all the cells that are responsive. There are other cells that we can identify in sleep, but they don't fire very much in the run, so they're not on the here. But the cells that are responsive have these place fields. So now that I've got all these fields, what am I going to do with them? I can't really show you these nice simple graphs anymore where I have cells on the y-axis and time on the x-axis because I've got a two-dimensional quantity. So I'm going to show you movies, so that's better. But how do I generate those movies? Well, I'm going to do the decoding. So I already showed you some data with this position decoding. Now I'm going to sort of explain the intuition a little bit more clearly. Essentially what we do is we combine the spikes with the place fields. So we allow so every time, in a narrow period of activity, every time a cell spikes, it's kind of like voting for its place field. So imagine we have 4 cells that have place fields like this. If they all fire 1 or 2 spikes, I'm going to have a strong belief that this is the location where the animal is. What's important about this is that it doesn't have to be the current location of the animal. So if these cells are coactive, I'm going to have a strong prediction that the hippocampus is saying this is where the rat is, even though I know, because I have a camera, that that's where the rat is. But I don't always get a prediction either. So if the cells are firing in a non-coordinated way, I'm actually generating posterior probabilities of position, and I can say here the probabilities are very low for any given location. So now let me show you a movie or two. So what you're going to see here is the rat in the task. This is real time, and the rat, you can see his position and his head direction. It's exploring this maze. You can see the positions of the possible food wells, and here's the actual position that's baited. Yeah.
That the place
I'm gonna
cell
have to play it again,
shooting
because-
around?
Yeah, inside
The
of
flickering is.
the flickering.
The flickering
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
decoded representation in the hippocampus. There's
So when he's saying decoded representation,
Yeah.
that's so. What they did was they took. So he talked about these 32 places. This is where the food could potentially pop up, and then they mapped this whole thing and found the place fields that cover the entirety of it, and then they're showing you the representations of the place.
Time lapse.
Yes.
You're seeing the rat's thoughts.
Yes, bro.
This is disgusting. This is so fucking insane.
Oh.
There's a
You're
probability- a
seeing
probability
it
associated with
project.
every
Dude,
single
it gets worse. No, this is where it is.
Slightly lit is
Yeah,
because
but
the
you can see it jetting out from it.
No,
Like it's
not
thinking
yet.
about.
Not
No?
yet.
Oh,
not
goddamn
yet.
it.
not yet.
representation is tightly focused. And in fact, this tight representation is much tighter than the size of any given place field. So the place fields are really cooperating during behavior to represent single positions. But what's perhaps more interesting is what happened next. And this is what happened just after this in the movie. But this movie is actually on a different time scale. I'll explain that in a minute. But this is what happened next. Then
That's
Ah, damn it.
smoothly translates away from its current position and moves off in the direction of the remembered goal position.
it's 20 times slower because this is that sharp wave that's happening,
Right.
and then they mapped it.
And that wasn't the same event repeated 4 times, that was 4 successive sharp waves, each of which contained this sequential activity.
4 different sharp waves.
Oh my
This was the remembered goal
god,
rotation.
dude.
And time, if you had seen this, was moving much more slowly, because these are temporally compressed events, just like I said.
Temporally
Each event takes
compressed.
Something like 100 milliseconds. Let me tell you how we analyzed it. Each frame of the movie corresponds to a short period of 10 milliseconds, during which activity is very tightly focused. And we haven't imposed that at all upon the system. That's a genuine feature, that at all moments during the events, the hippocampus seems to be very tightly focused in representing one position. Collapsing across time, we can now show you what the sequences look like. And here's just examples of the kinds of sequences we see just from one session. You see some of them are curvy, some of them are straight. But did they go anywhere? That's the real question. So I'm going to show you two things. Firstly, here's all the sequences that happen when the animal is at the home location. Now, there's something called an initiation bias. Awake replays tend to start in the current location. That could be because there's a very strong stimulus. It's obviously telling us something about the mechanism. I would say it's because it's navigationally useful to know how to get somewhere from here.
I need to know where I'm at to get anywhere.
Across all of these events and just sum them all up. When he's at the home well, it's the home well that's in common. But what's interesting is if we now do the same trick for all the events that occurred whenever the animal was at a random well, the home well is also the event that's in common, suggesting that these events are converging on this remembered well. We can capture that, quantify that here, where we see that the total representation, meaning the amount of brightness in these probability figures, is concentrated at the remembered home well compared to all the other wells. And in fact, this is a statistical outlier. And the end point, if we just look at where the trajectories tend to end, that's also an outlier. So this is quite interesting because this means that as an experimenter, I can look at the activity in joint sharp waves when the animal's away from the goal, and I can tell you where the remembered goal is. And that's a kind of goal coding that we haven't been able to find before in place cells. And it's not because this location was more familiar. We can look at all the locations that the animal, for his own purposes, tends to enjoy to just sit in, and those locations that he doesn't spend very much time in, and they're just equally unrepresented compared to the goal. And then, what's important here is, I didn't tell you, but we actually changed the goal location that he has to remember every day. It takes him a few trials to figure out what that is, but we change it every day. Because if you remember, it's flexibility that we think is very important for cognitive mapping. And when we change the goal location to the new location, that becomes the overrepresented location the next day. So I showed you that the sequences start in the current location, end at the remembered location, but do they tell the rat anything about how to get there? So we did this analysis where we compared the future path and the past path, future path and past path with the path that the animal takes. Beg your pardon, let me start that again. The future path that the animal's about to take behaviorally, the past path that he's just taken behaviorally, and the replay sequence or playstyle sequence that's occurred.
So this is about to be the part that blows your fucking mind, where he's talking about the future path. This is a lot of science shit just for this video at the end, like this little clip that he's about to show.
Find that the future path tends to be very concentrated. These replays tend to be very concentrated at a short angular displacement with the replay. The replays tend to be very close in angle to the future path of the animal. They tend to be much less close to the past path of the animal. Interestingly, the prediction here is much stronger when the animal has to go to the home well than when the animal is moving somewhere else. So here, this is where the animal is at the home well, and he has to move off to do some random foraging. Because he knows where he's random foraging, but he knows where he's going to go. So he can predict what he's about to do. But the prediction is much weaker. And that could be for many reasons. It could be that there is a strong prediction, but then the animal changes his mind as he's randomly foraging. And then interestingly, there seems to be this reverse, this sort of negative correlation here. And indeed, it was a feature of the task that the random wells never repeated. So perhaps the system knows that. So the final thing I want to tell you is what I think is a very interesting aspect of this system, perhaps related to imagination. It's a feature of this task that we moved the remembered home well location every day, and we didn't repeat the random locations within the day, at least for the first 19 trials. What that means is that every single actual navigational act the animal was being asked to perform was a novel trajectory in terms of start and end location, even though it's a very familiar space. So I'm going to show you an example of, this is sort of a collection of different timescales in this movie. You have behavior in real time, and then you switch to this replay time. But the point is to show you what the replay does when faced with this novel combination of start and end. So the animal's randomly foraging in this phase. He's going to find the food, and then, hopefully, bang, you get a replay that starts where he is, moves nicely to the goal location. Then you get this interesting replay that goes down here. You can remember that. You get another one of these. Now this specific trajectory is not one that the animal's ever had to make before. Then he does it for the first time. Then, interestingly, produces another sequence that also goes down here, just like that other one. And then he does.
The same shit.
I won't have much time to tell you about, but it looks like there may be multi-step predictions in this activity. But this general trend for the sequences to match, to predict the future behavior, even when the specific sequences were novel, in this very familiar space, where they had to be sort of inferred, that was just as strong as any of the other replays. So, to sum up, hippocampal place cells represent the current location, but also the substrate for simulating experience in other locations. The simulation sequences, I would say, exquisitely capture the spatial structure of an environment, and they are purposive. They're directed toward goal locations when an animal is planning his movements in a complex spatial memory task. So who was right all along?
Tolman, that's who they're talking about. He says that he's the one that coined this idea of the cognitive maps, and that rats are able to do this thing.
Bro. So not only is projection real, but the whole see it, dream it, be it shit might be too.
Close your activity. Yeah, so basically what that shows, and what he says there at the end, is that it's simulating, right? So it's telling, my brain is telling me that this stuff behind me exists. It's holding its place there. So we're actually operating inside of this cognitive map more than we're operating inside of reality the way that we think we are. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's the place cells, or it's these fields, it's these representations that we get from reality, and then we operate inside of this cognitive space that we are creating at all times. Now, that's not to say that I can't, it's not like the Matrix and it's Neo where I can say that bullets aren't going to fucking hit me, right?
Right.
World space still exists, but that changes all meaning now for me. Right? Like, there's only certain things, and they're not meaningful. It's vectors and geometries, and that is it. That's it.
No, this is pretty profound because it goes back into so many things that we've talked about in the past, such as even talking about, like, you don't actually see an object, study it, and understand it. You immediately see, like, okay, I've got a refrigerator in front of me, but if I was asked to draw that refrigerator tomorrow, I'm not going to get it right. This is my fridge, by the way. I see it every day. I would still fuck something up on it. It's that we're immediately augmenting these things to where they belong, not what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Gross.
And then, yeah, dude, you got to watch the rat think about where it was going to go, and then fucking it went there.
The fact that you can see the rat's thoughts. That's the shit that I'm not... Where are the human trials on this, dude?
Well, they found that we have these cells, and obviously our cells are going to be more complex.
Sure.
Right? It's not a one-to-one comparison, but
No.
it's not a we don't have this. It's a we have this, and it's way more complex, but we have this basic functionality inside of our cells.
Right. And, well, it's showing a distinct type of consciousness that I don't think has been, like, I agreed with by most people. Most people automatically believe, like, well, if it's just instinct living, like dogs, cats, fucking rats, it's not. It's just acting on instinct, nothing else.
Mm.
Now, you can say that those projections are instinctual, sure, but it's also profoundly saying that it's able to think, and that's wild, dude.
Well, the next time we talk, it gets even worse. It gets even worse because we haven't gotten to the point where I can comfortably say that we have figured out where reality is, because there's something that's the substrate of these place cells. Because what is informing these place cells, right? Like, what is it the visual information? I kind of already gave the answer, but is what because the question for me is always, what if I took away all of my sensory experience? What am I left with?
Right.
Does anything fucking exist then? Because if I can't see, I can't hear, I can't taste, I can't touch, what am I left with?
Yeah, can you augment any
No, you can't.
knowledge?
No,
I don't think so.
There isn't any knowledge.
Yeah, you can't.
The only knowledge you have is existence. I am aware.
And even at that, I don't think so. Could you feel that shit out? Like,
I think
fuck.
I think that because I've existed, it would just be a blackness. You know what I mean? It's like the idea of, like, what does a blind person see that's never seen? You know what I mean? I could kind of see what a blind person would see that's seen before.
Yeah.
But I don't have any idea what goes on inside of the brain of a blind person that's never seen. And that's kind of where I go back to with that sensory shit, is like, this is how I'm interacting with reality is my senses. Like that's the baseline of Descartes. Like we are, that's the Cartesian duality. They call it the mind-body duality, and it comes from Descartes. And we basically are all fucking Pickle Rick, and we're piloting these fucking meat suit transformers. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the question is for me then is what is the real world? Damn, I tried to end that way sooner than that. I just wanted to end it like that. I leave
Yeah.
it open, fucking